Welcome, everybody, to today's Found Consciousness podcast. And today we have Eyla, and this is a very special podcast. I have been tuning into Ayla's work for many years, simply just because of how important it is in today's world. And Eyla is a holistic doula, birth trauma, alchemist, specialist, and an empowering educator in the realm of conscious birthing. She has founded the Uncovering Birth platform, which serves as a space for parents or to-be parents to empower themselves in a modern world that is so full of snares and traps that turn us away from our innate connection to the divine and to others. And the beauty of Ayla's work is that her principles and guidance isn't just subject to parents and women, but for all who are accessing their own sovereign powers and for the seekers of truth. So I'm excited today as we traverse the world of birthing, parenthood, and empowerment. So yeah, welcome, Eyla.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you.
I think the best place to start, I always ask my guests, is kind of what's your story? What got you into the work that you do now?
Yeah, I was laughing the other day because I said to someone, I was kind of relaying information about what I've been up to over the last 2 decades and, my journey. And then I said, I kind of feel like I have 9 lives, because I look back and at some points it seems like it's not connected. But then when I really reflect on it, it's all absolutely connected and perfect. And divinely woven. And so I guess I'll go back to one of the most recent lives, which is when I was working in the American foster care system as a guardian ad litem. I was visiting homes of children who were temporarily placed while their court cases were being managed or processed as they had been taken away from their parents and they were given temporary homes. And that was some of the most challenging work for me because it was really coming into contact with kind of what's just underneath the surface in our world. And as an anthropology major, what I studied in university, I was shocked because the way that I understood family systems was so there's a type of simplicity and a divinity that I was experiencing as I was learning about family systems. And when I went into this work, I saw that just underneath the surface, like most people were experiencing deep suffering. Most people were disconnected from their families. Most people didn't know their parents. There was so much that I started to uncover. And of course, I wasn't under some delusion that, there wasn't strife and suffering in the world when it came to families, but I started to see this disparity from what I had really anchored myself in as far as what the family unit is and could be, and how having that could collectively, heal the world and the fabric of society. And so, after some time doing that work, I decided that I wanted to get to maybe the core of how women were arriving at these places where their children were being taken away, where, fathers were not included in the picture, where fathers didn't feel they had worth in the process. And that took me to birth, basically. I studied to be a doula. I wanted to be in the space where women were birthing. I wanted to understand on a practical level how this process worked, and then also to energetically experience how families were formed. And that took me even deeper into understanding conception, started working with couples in conscious conception, and through that started learning a lot about people's family history, and ancestry and belief systems around birth, conception, forming a family based on their ancestry, right? Because we hold these stories in our energetic being and our cells. And so that really took me on a big journey, which led me to working with women one-on-one and men one-on-one with birth trauma, even before getting into the conversation of conception. And so I started weaving this web of supporting women and families at birth, working one-on-one with couples on unbraiding belief systems around the process of birth and what it means to be a parent. And then, of course, women who experienced loss, working with that. So fast forward 13 years, I'm in the process and have been in the process of training other women to do this work, to hold space for this, because it's, it's something that I believe every community could benefit from, is having that beacon or that resource to go deeper into integrating one's experiences, dismantling belief systems, writing new programs. There's a beacon that can exist in every community for women and men to access that. So now I'm mostly training other women, mentoring them in this process, and still working, of course, with people who want to form a family.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That seems like a natural progression from your own experience learning and then now teaching your wisdom to others and helping empower others. What kind of stood out was like, it kind of all goes back, I guess not all, but a lot of it does, to the birth trauma. And I remember sort of trying to, when I stepped into the work of, okay, I want to heal my traumas and my family patterns. And I read a book, or my mentor gave me a book by Arthur Janov, I believe, The Primal Scream. And it was
Mm-hmm.
that book that just was like, poof, right? Like a lot of the stuff, our patterns, the way we are, and even
Yeah.
just in general, mothers giving birth, it all traces back to that birth process and can be
Right.
traced back to that birth process and what happened. For myself, it's like kind of asking my mum a load of questions. How did this play out? What happened after? What happened before? Et cetera, to find all this stuff out. But I was wondering if you could just touch on birth trauma, the nature of birth trauma, the kinds of birth trauma people are going through or babies are going through, and how that is impacting the family dynamic and just the course of their own lives, really.
Oh my goodness, that's a great question, and it's such an intricate web because let me just first illustrate an example, like a common example of how a woman might experience trauma in her process, right? So say that she elects to have a natural birth in a hospital, for example, and I can speak more specifically to the Western world because that's where I work, between Latin America, Canada, and the US. But a woman elects to have a natural birth, and her partner is on board, and maybe she has some family support. However, she's doing it without pain drugs, right? She's electing to do this, naturally. However, because perhaps her mother's stories about how birth goes, or what she's seen in Hollywood films, or what she's been exposed to, and the logic that she's formed around it, whether cultural, clinical, political, all of those logics influence her going into this process. So she goes into a system that says, sure, we'll support you in your process, but if we need to do something, we will do it. And so she's kind of engaged in this dynamic where she's trusting someone or a group of people or a system she doesn't know very well. And when the time comes, certain things are done, right? Maybe they ask her to come in early for an induction because she's, the baby, she did an ultrasound and maybe the baby's measuring kind of large in the ultrasound. So now she's been asked to do an induction, which is, typically administering synthetic oxytocin, Pitocin, into her system, which can go in either direction. It could be effective in speeding up labor, or it could cause a variety of reactions in her system and in the baby's system, leading to potentially an emergency C-section, or leading to her wanting an epidural or some sort of pain drug because the intensity of the synthetic drug in her system is so overwhelming. It's you're not naturally progressing with the body's support, with your endorphins, with your own hormones. You're basically, your system's being hijacked and then like put in overdrive. So it can be incredibly intense for the nervous system, the body, and the mind. And so it makes sense a woman might need to check out for that experience. So say she gets the epidural, and then maybe that slows the baby's heart tones down, and now an emergency C-section is called. So the baby is not born vaginally, the baby is born under extreme stress. elevated cortisol levels. There's a whole skipping through natural biological processes and benefits that the baby would get being born vaginally when it's born via C-section. So it's born via C-section, and then the mother and the baby are separated for some time. Typically, the baby's shown to the mother for a moment so she can kind of enjoy a moment of connection, and then the baby's taken away, washed, and then she's taken to post-op, where she's experiencing a variety of symptoms from just having her abdomen completely opened and coming off of the drugs. So just in that experience alone, the woman has now been disconnected from her baby, and a series of hormones have not been set off that would typically initiate the primordial bonding that exists between a mother and baby. Often when women are reintroduced to the baby after this experience, they feel confused or disoriented. They don't feel that same intensity of connection that a woman feels with a vaginal birth. The hormones have not been initiated, neither for her or the baby. Typically, breastfeeding is challenging at this time, so the baby will be bottle fed. So then there's a cascade of events based off of the decision that was made to entrust a system that she's not familiar with, that's not familiar with her, that is operating based off of a few ideals, and goals, which are keep the mother and the baby alive and meet a quota financially. That's kind of the main goals of the system. However we get there, it doesn't really matter as long as everyone's alive at the end. And so when a woman births within that framework, it's incredibly traumatic for the energetic body of the family and also the physical, biological experience of the family. So afterwards, a woman is feeling a lot of emotions, maybe shame, maybe regret, confusion, feeling violated, not sure why, because she hired these people to help her, support her, but she feels violated. Her body feels that things were done to it that she didn't really want, that she didn't really plan for, but she's being told to be grateful and, at peace because she has a baby who's alive. And so she has to suppress the trauma that she experienced in this process in order to, I don't know, show face or continue forward or appease the people around her who don't know how to hold space for the grief of losing a natural, ideal, peaceful, blissful birth experience, or even the initial connection with the baby. It's a lot of grief when you don't get that. And so a woman ends up perhaps having another baby after that. Maybe she just goes straight to a C-section because she had one the first time, and that's again another violation to the physical body, the fascia, the nervous system, and again there's another disconnected experience because the baby was not born vaginally. So when a woman finally says something's not right, something doesn't feel right in me, I don't feel connected as a mother, I feel resentful towards my husband because I don't feel that I was held and safe and supported, like, this is where a woman begins to unravel. And it's actually a good thing, because now there's an opportunity for alchemy. Now there's something inside of this experience that we can excavate and work with. And actually, in my doula training, many women come from traumatic birth experiences to alchemize in that mentorship and become a doula so that they can be an advocate and a resource for women who might just be blindly going into a birth experience. So yeah, it's and it's something that a lot of women don't realize they've experienced until they begin to learn about what's actually possible for them with a natural, undisturbed birth. That's when the wheels start to turn and they say, oh, wow, someone told me my baby was big and then it was born and it was only 7 pounds and I didn't need that C-section. I didn't need that induction. Like, wait a minute, someone gave me bad information. And then the journey of, the rabbit hole, as we call it, begins. The journey down the rabbit hole begins. And we see this too with children who I would really say are taking so much of the burden of our suffering and our unresolved trauma. I mean, all children want is love and connection from their parents. All they want to know is that they've served them and they have love and connection. And so they're willing to take the weight of all of our lack of consciousness
Hmm.
by receiving these interventions, by receiving shots, by receiving ultrasounds, and then living a life with things like, you know, autism or other cognitive behavioral issues. They're willingly taking this for us as we shift out of this, as we shift into more consciousness and we start waking up. So yeah, it's impacting, and it's the effects are resounding throughout the whole family system.
Hmm. And it sounds like to me that there's two sides to the coin. Obviously, there's self responsibility, and doing the due diligence and gaining the knowledge and empowering yourself in the space so that you are confident in the choice that you've made, and knowing all of the outcomes as best as possible. But then there's the other side of the coin where there is actually a system in place which is damaging. The allopathic, the medical system, that's not the system you want to rely on, in this process. And so there's the empowering yourself, and then there's the snares and the traps, and we can go in both directions. But I was super curious to learn about what the medical system, the snares and some of the traps that they lay regarding this birthing process. Is it ignorance? Is it designed? In your opinion, in your experience, can you talk on that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely designed that the medical system undergoes certain protocols, or they play out certain protocols for the woman in this process, right? Because we didn't start birthing in hospitals really until the 1890s in the US and England, for example. And even then, it was few and far between. And then it wasn't until the 1940s that a lot of marketing and propaganda went into bringing the woman into the hospital. Up until the 1880s, 1890s, women were birthing with the midwives of their community, and some women were hiring male physicians who started entering obstetrics, or they just basically formed, like, a group of guys got together and said, we are going to form this club and we will do obstetrics and we will learn about the female body and birth through books and cadavers, right? They actually didn't have any experience in the birth room, because birth from the beginning of time was something that was entrusted to elders and wise people of the community or the tribe, respective of where they were, all over the world. So you had to be part of the family or part of the system to know about it and get the knowledge passed down until, physicians came onto the scene. And so midwives were slowly edged out, and then very quickly edged out when the marketing went into the luxury of birthing in the hospital, right? They saw the potential. Women were birthing every single day all over the world, and it's a highly charged emotional event. And so when you start to play on phrases and languaging, have someone take care of you while you go through this process, have clean running water, have a hot meal prepared, someone will watch the baby while you get to rest. And if anything should go wrong, we have the tools, techniques, and drugs to help you, right? So that languaging, it only took about 40 years to get women, 90% of women birthing in the hospital. And then we got to the 70s, and it's like 99% of women birth in hospitals. And still to this day, 99% of women birth in hospitals. And that might sound shocking, because people in alternative health communities, they're in an echo chamber of home birthers and natural birthers. So they think it's like
Mhm.
everyone's doing it, but really they're not. And so I wouldn't say that there's any, like, on the kind of ground level, if we're looking at a hierarchy of who's running things, like, doctors are here at the bottom of that hierarchy, and they're simply servants that are wanting to do the best they can to bring health, safety, and longevity to the community through their techniques. But if we start to go up the ladder of this hierarchy, there's a siphoning of resources, energy, life force that these higher ups are getting through these servants, which are the doctors. And so, no, I wouldn't say that there's anything malicious behind what they do. They're simply serving the framework that was laid out for them, and they're training in medical school, which is part of that hierarchy and that framework. So they have to follow that. But if, on a very basic level, we've just brought a very natural process, a natural byproduct of being human into an emergency framework, right? Hospitals are about emergencies, saving lives. You get into a car accident, you need to reattach something, right? All of those things happen in the hospital. And so we've brought birth, which is a very deeply spiritual, profound, slow metamorphosis into that setting. So it's just, it's bound to get messy because we're bringing it to the wrong party. So yeah, so I'd say it's by design, but not by the people who are actually attending us. They're not the ones designing it. It's much deeper, and we'll never know truly who those who's designing it. Let's say some of us might have guesses, but doctors are just serving out kind of this greater framework and belief system that's already been laid in place, a little over 100 years ago, maybe longer than that.
Yeah, it's like sometimes when I communicate with doctors, my dad, he was in and out of the hospital. My mum's been in and out of the hospital, and this is sort of a responsibility for when I was a teenager, me and my brother, we would communicate with doctors. And at this time, I was aware of what's going on, what a hospital and what these systems are. And it was like when you're communicating with them, it's not them speaking. It's almost like there is a software behind it. There's some,
Mm-hmm.
and you can sense that there's some. It's not your fault. There's something there behind your words and your actions, and that's always caught my attention because, like you're saying, these are like even a health crisis. It's a spiritual experience for many people. They've gained spiritual awakenings through the decline of their health or through a disease crisis, and the
Right.
birthing process. Again, there's something nothing more divine and spiritual than that experience, and there's just a major disconnect because the energies are just they're almost like polar opposites in a way,
Yeah.
and because they're polar opposites in this world, it's combined and it's almost really messy. What are some of the things I've looked into ultrasound and some of these things that women are told to go to and regular checkups and etc etc. What are some of the things that you think are some of the most important things that women should pay attention to and gain understanding and knowledge of within that system to sort of help themselves?
Yeah. So it's not what I would suggest is really not the typical of what's like prescribed or recommended, because for me, what I've seen over the last decade or so in this space is that when women start to educate themselves about the natural, normal, physiological nature of birth, they start to come into contact with parts of themselves that might be, I don't know, neglected, let's say. They start to say, "Oh, I have a choice when it comes to this. Oh, if I actually just listen to my body, I can listen to my baby's heartbeat. I don't actually have to go to a doctor or go to this appointment and have them listen and tell me that everything is okay. I have the capacity and the agency to listen to my own baby. I can start to pay attention to my body. If I eat a certain amount of fat and protein in the morning, I actually feel sustained and I feel a lot of movement with my baby. I have more energy. The round ligament pain goes away. When they come into contact with that part that's been neglecting and going outsourcing so much, they become deeply empowered. And so I'd say a woman's first step is to just learn about birth without to unlearn what they've learned from Hollywood, from, these kind of psycho terror stories from family members or friends. It's a dismantling of their belief systems about what's possible. That's the first step completely. And then getting a good education on natural normal birth. And then from there, they start to notice, okay, well, if now I know about birth, now I realize it's not so emergent as I thought. What if I work with a different type of provider? Like maybe I meet a midwife, right? And so I invite women to just take a journey of discovery. You don't have to be working with anyone when you're 12 weeks pregnant. There's nothing you need to do. There's nothing you need to know. If you feel movement, you haven't had a cycle in a few months, okay, you're pregnant, right? We know you're pregnant. You don't need anyone to tell you that. And so you start to notice your body changing, and then you start just doing research. Well, let me see, what is it if I meet with this midwife? How do I feel there? Do I feel safe in her presence? Does my nervous system downregulate when I'm with this person, right? Oh no, I noticed that when I feel good with her, but I really don't feel good with that OBGYN. I feel tense. My blood pressure goes up every time I walk into the office. So there's an invitation to notice how the body and the system is reacting to certain environments. This is a clue. This is a foreshadowing of how the birth experience could play out. So where is a woman self-betraying? Where she knows that every time she goes to the office, she gets high blood pressure readings, and she's being put on notice that if it doesn't get better, she's going to have to take some sort of medication. And then when she goes home and she checks her own blood pressure, it's fine. So that's information that she self-betrays. She's continuing to go somewhere where she doesn't feel safe, rather than taking ownership and accountability and saying, you know what, I'm going to make a different choice, and I'm going to work with someone who I feel safer with. And it might not feel 100% safe to work with the midwife, because she still has to unlearn, oh, well, what if something happens? What if this is dangerous, right? Because so many people say birthing in the home is dangerous. You need the technology, you need this, what if, what if, what if? So she has to now go into the what ifs and really unbraid that. And so that's the foundation of how to prepare for this experience and do the best things, right? And then from there, we can focus on nutrition, focus on, movement, right? So for me, I always recommend primal movement to my clients. You don't have to do special pregnancy classes or, exercise classes or Pilates or whatever. Like, you just spend more time outside interacting with your environment. You engage in things that are natural movement systems for the body, which could be swimming, walking, dancing, climbing trees, things that require you to squat. So that's like gardening or cleaning or playing with your existing toddlers. That's plenty of natural, normal movement for the body. You don't need much else than that. And so it's a return to primal movement and eating a more ancestral diet. What does that mean? No processed foods. I'm just going to list out very basically, but fat, protein, getting 100 grams of protein a day. Most women, when they start to self-examine, they realize they're getting like 30 to 40 grams of protein a day at most. So making that change, that can also be deeply spiritual for a woman, because maybe she's battled with calorie counting her whole life because she grew up in a family where she had to notice these things and couldn't gain a certain amount of weight, and was told that egg yolks were bad because of the fat-free movement that happened in the 80s and 90s. Like, now she's going through her journey of unlearning that. So it's an invitation to unlearn and relearn, and it's not as complicated as we think, where we need to rely on a system to tell us, yes, you've checked this box, right? There's so much information on the internet that says, as soon as you suspect you're pregnant, come in to confirm it. We'll do blood work and an ultrasound and a urine test. And it's like, couldn't we just teach women how to know if they're pregnant on their own? Couldn't we just give them the tools? But we don't learn those tools as young women, because we don't have initiations as young women anymore. And our mothers and their mothers have lost that knowledge. So it's, again, a relearning process. But the moment you walk into that office and they give you the confirmation of pregnancy, then they schedule the next ultrasound, then they schedule the genetic screening. Then if you're older than 35, they want you to come in for additional screenings, because now you've been categorized as a geriatric pregnancy. and then they want to monitor this, and then they want you to take that, and it becomes you become incredibly entangled in a system and a grid of fear. And now you're scared of something when you weren't, and you don't even know really what you're looking out for, besides the fact that you're pregnant. You've been diagnosed with some sort of, feels like you've been diagnosed with an illness, you know? And on top of that, layer the fact that you're older than 35. Now it's like you're scared of this boogeyman that that no one's really given you a reason why. So
Yeah, it's like the story rings quite personal to me as someone in my family is going through that, and regular checkups, and
mhm.
almost like there's a fearful nature of it, and even though she doesn't believe it per se, but it's almost like an unconscious choice to be attached to the system because it brings some false sense of safety or something of that nature. But you know, she's stressed out. She's stressed out by them calling every day. You've got to come here. You've got to come do this, and it's just so unnatural. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's like this. It's a process of unlearning a lot of things and deconditioning yourself. Because what stands out to me is all the programming there is of home birthing. I mean, you watch the movies, and every movie scene about a birthing process just looks absolutely horrendous.
I know.
And it looks, and I can imagine. So, part of your work is sort of helping women go through this deconditioning phase,
Yeah.
gently just let go of the programming, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes so much deeper, right? Because this parentification of the medical system goes so much deeper into our own relationship with our parents. And so if, which most likely is true for many of us, boys and girls, in order to secure love and connection with our parents, there were a certain list of behaviors and things we had to do, right? We learned early on that love and connection is conditional based on our behavior, our performance, because we didn't have emotionally regulated parents or emotionally intelligent parents who could say, "Oh, you're in a moment where you're being yourself, and I have the nervous system capacity to let you do that. And then when it passes, right?" But as an example, when a child is having a moment, they've experienced something where they had an expectation and then it wasn't met and they're frustrated. One might call it a tantrum. One might call it manipulation, but it's really a 2-year-old who's like, "Oh, I thought we were doing that and now we're doing this, and I'm like upset," or "I fell and I hurt myself and I'm upset and I'm crying." And what they need is the parent, the space holder, to help them downregulate. And you can't take a child or an adult often from 60 down to zero or 100 down to zero in just 3 seconds. It's in stages. So first, you offer touch, right? Allow them to keep screaming as their body's just offloading and discharging. And so with the touch, they might go down to 80, and then you might breathe, and through your breathing as the adult, the child might start to pick up the rhythm, and now they're going down to 50. And then maybe you ask them, "Is there something I can do?" Right? And then now, "Oh, someone's here for me." Okay, I go down to 30, and then we get down to zero. Now the child has processed it and can say something. Say, "Oh, I thought we were doing this, but we're doing this," or "I hurt myself." And the parent can say, "I see that. Is there anything else I can do?" And then the child says, "No, no." And they feel satisfied just in the holding, that they were allowed to have the emotion or allowed to be hurt and cry without being told, "Go to your room and calm down until you're, or stay there until you're calm," right? That's often what a lot of us heard. So we had to suppress, and we had to have this inner battle inside, but show up in the dining room with a smile on the face and be a good girl so that they wouldn't tell us to go away or to shut up or to whatever. So, that programming happens very early on. It's not intentional from our parents, they just didn't know. And then what happens, we get into a dynamic with the medical system when we become pregnant, for example, or maybe, we went through the rigmarole with the medical system growing up because we were always having ear infections or we were always having certain ailments. And so then that was where, we were tended to. Someone would listen to us, they would touch us, they would help us, they would solve the problem. And so when we get into the birth space, it's like, oh, I go to this doctor and, if I show up, I tell him I ate the things, I didn't eat the sushi, I didn't eat the coffee, and I've been going on a walk every day. And he says, good job. And I feel like loved and I feel accepted and I feel good. And if he tells me that I have to do this because something could go wrong, I'm going to do it because I'm not going to be a bad girl and defy him because I want him to like me and I want to be in his good graces. And then guess what? That doctor, she goes into labor, that doctor's, out golfing and the backup goes, and then she feels abandoned and confused. So we place a false sense, we project, right? We project onto the medical system, onto the government as well, but right, we really project onto them, and we're so vulnerable as women, and we haven't healed that part of us, that little girl inside of us that's still searching for that love and connection. And so against our better judgment, against our intuition and our instinct, we continue to engage with the system, expecting to get something where it's just not available.
And so it's not a matter of like changing your external reality and having conversations with parents or those that have betrayed you or whatever. It's an internal process. It is like what you're saying. That's why it's birth trauma alchemist or alchemy, because it is a learning the process of alchemy and how you actually transmute all the patterns and the family patterns that are inside of you is going
Right.
to ultimately lead to not only becoming a better mother or better person, but it's going to support the family dynamic. And it reminds me of something you said earlier, which is like you're teaching women to alchemize this stuff, alchemize their emotions. And I'm a firm believer that we're all sort of connected in this web of consciousness, and simply
Mhm.
somebody transmuting a deep pattern, which I think there is this pattern in this whole world, this archetype of the traumatic birth. It's almost become this egregore in and of itself that has so much energy that people, the archetype doesn't choose you. You chose the archetype. It's like you're engulfed by this traumatic birthing experience. And I think a lot of women have, these feelings inside of them. And I believe that the work of transmuting these patterns that are part of this egregoric archetype is helping others do it, is helping lift some
Yeah.
of the veil for others to work and process their stuff as well, which I think is really beautiful. So I assume, and that's my question to you, it's like your focus is really alchemy and teaching women how to process these things, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe, and I know that there is an alchemist inside of every woman. It's inherent in our nature, right? We have a womb. Most of us have a womb, if it's not been removed by the medical system. And that is where alchemy takes place, right? That's where a life is formed. If a woman has an idea, she brings the inspiration into herself, and then she takes out her materials, right? Her wool and her yarn, she begins to knit. If a woman is given, some ingredients, or she opens the fridge and there's just like 10 things in there, like, if she's tapped into that alchemy, she'll be able to make something with whatever's in there, and it's the women who have been unfortunately programmed by, her own parents' trauma or lack of awareness, lack of consciousness, let's say, to believe that she can't do these things. She doesn't know how. It's not possible for her. Um, but you put a woman in any situation when she's tapped into that possibility, and she can form alliances for people. She can inspire her, male counterpart to do certain things because, she sees the potential in him and all of his gifts. And just by her presence and just by offering her energetic field, he can blossom in his own work and purpose and mission. And so Yes, every woman has an alchemist within her, and it's just a matter, again, like what you said, of deprogramming the belief that she can't and rewriting that life script. If we look at transactional analysis or family constellations, family systems therapy, we look at the life script that's formed in the first 7 years of life, well, formed at conception into the first 7 years of life. Whatever we witnessed and whatever was passed down from our parents' belief systems forms that life script, the blueprint. And so then we carry out unconsciously after age 7, we start to carry out certain actions and programs to continue to reinforce the life script, right? And it takes a lot of work, and it often can't happen until maybe later in adulthood where we've hit that rock bottom where we say, oh, I'm done with the life script. It's time to write a new life script because it's keeping me sick, or it's keeping me, in a conflict, physical, disease conflict, or it's keeping me in toxic dynamics, or it's keeping me poor without abundance, right? There's a life script that was formed. I'm ready to face it head on, and I'm ready to alchemize. And it's possible for everyone to do. But the caveat is that there is no one else to blame. There is no one else to say, you did this, or what happens if it doesn't work? Who can I place the responsibility on? So part of this maturation process is reclaiming the responsibility. When we reclaim the alchemy, we also reclaim our responsibility and our agency. And that's what feels really good about being codependent, on the medical system, is that, if it doesn't go right, like, I can be angry at the doctor. I can blame them. I can say that they failed me, never really doing the work to go deep within and say, I elected this experience based on my life script and my belief systems, and I continue to choose it. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Accepting responsibility is really hard.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that, yeah, like you're saying, that is the beauty that comes with it, because that's something that I noticed just of myself, speaking as a male. Like, that's when you're dealing with your inner reality, you are you're trying to take not just lessons, but you're trying to all of this yang energy that you've been giving out, blaming and being the victim and pointing the finger at the big bad guy. It's almost like you're bringing this in, and what you're trying to do is pluck out the where have you created this situation? What aspect of you has created this reality that you live in? And what's coming to me is this is a lifelong process.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that just never ends. You'll be doing it for the rest of your life. Going back to the birthing process, I know, and I've heard a lot of experiences where simply just, the woman becoming pregnant is almost like it gives an awakening itself. But in its, 9 months or, 8, 7 months of doing this work, have you, like, what is achievable in this time, and what are the expectations that mothers should have when they're doing this work? Because it's not like they're going to process all of their family patterns in this period of time. So is
Right.
it just a matter of going with the flow and just doing the best you possibly can? Like, what are the sort of principles that you share with mothers in this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's truly possible to do in, let's say, this short amount of time, which is the pregnancy, because it goes by very quickly, is accept the invitation to take self-responsibility. And, say a woman does want to engage with the conventional medical system, she still wants to go to the hospital because she feels like that's where she's safest. It's still an opportunity to take radical responsibility for the outcomes and recognize that just because you're birthing in that space doesn't mean that you will get all of the things you want. So you have to now look at priorities, right? And and analyze those, become familiar with those, intimate with those, and it's an opportunity to further connect with your partner. And this is often where women start to get heavy into the process of saying, making a birth plan, for example, and saying, oh, I won't be taking this shot during the pregnancy. I will be doing this. I opt out of that, whatever it is. They become familiar with an AMA, against medical advice form, where they decline certain things that the state says is necessary to do, right? It's just language. We have to remember it's, they say they're obligated, but really a woman always has a right to decline everything. So in that process, bringing her partner into it, there's an invitation there to restore a polarity that might be lost in their relationship. I wouldn't say that that's something that's going to get resolved in the pregnancy. It might be lifelong work they do in their dynamic, but that's where the process can begin. Maybe she always thought she was going to work full time, and she realizes now, in learning about birth and tapping in, surrendering to being a mother, she might not want to go back to work for 2 years. It's just as an example. And so then now her man is called to make different decisions. And can he step up in that way? And now his initiation has been, the fire has been lit for his initiation. And so these are things that can be started in the pregnancy process and will continue to be work that they do as they go on. But this is where that cauldron, that alchemical cauldron that I speak of, that's just kind of there brewing, this is what can happen in it. This is where it can all start. And as long as the woman knows that she's 110% responsible for how things play out in her process, she can birth anywhere. I mean, it's not like birthing out in the woods alone is like the enlightened ideal scenario for a woman. I don't actually agree with that personally, but if it's what a woman wants, it's what she wants. It's about the woman accepting radical responsibility for any environment she chooses to birth in, with any type of attendance she chooses to have there. That's where the true, I say, like, ascension can happen, where she says, oh, I am here. I see this is happening. I opted to do this, and I surrender to my choice. That's really where the peace and the integration starts to take place. So, it's there is a big movement of free birth, for example, where women are, often in rejection of the medical system, yet they don't have that radical responsibility necessary for it. They are holding a lot of charge. They have unresolved trauma around violations, perhaps being betrayed, feeling abandoned, and all of that is what's fueling this desire to go in the opposite direction of a medical birth. And very often a woman ends up transferring back to the hospital in those situations because there's a lot that's unresolved underneath the surface. So this is just to say that the setting, yes, it does impact the process, but it's not going to guarantee anything for the woman.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. That what I've seen, and I guess I've also in the past been guilty of sharing kinds of content that, although necessary and although important information regarding the medical system, it does polarize people. It charges their, like you're saying, it gives them this charge of emotion, which almost takes them away from discernment, which does take them
Right.
away from discernment. And yes, they've uncovered and discovered that the medical system is this, that, and there's all these snares and traps within the process. But if I'm not willing to go into my own conscious patterns, uncover them, and create the space and the foundation for what a holistic or a true holistic birth, a sovereign birth, a birth that you've divinely chosen, is, then there is a huge disconnect. And like you're saying, I can imagine that creating a lot of issues. So I love your approach that it isn't just about finding out about all of that stuff and just saying no, 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 rather looking internally. And I think with any process of discovery, any spiritual process has to have that element of first look at yourself, look at the patterns that you have and what's within yourself, and yeah, that seems like the correct starting point. I
Yeah.
want, yeah, I wanted to sort of touch on some things pertaining to the actual birthing process, and because there's a lot of information out there, there's a lot of disinformation out there, and a woman is pregnant, she's in labor, she's about to give birth. How how does she maintain her sovereignty during this process? What are the things that she and I know this is things that need to be discussed and thought about before this comes, but what is she to look out for to make sure that she's not only protecting herself but the baby and her family? Yeah, could you touch on some of those things? Because I've looked at, the various ways in which they disrupt this intricate spiritual process. They take the babies away, they give the babies all kinds of shots and all this
Yeah.
disrupt. Can you talk about the importance of just the actual process of not being in this system?
Yeah. So, I myself, for example, I chose to have a midwife at my birth, um, because I know what can unfold at a birth, and I know that I personally don't have the skill set to go outside of my body and physically help myself, right? Like I can't, like if my baby's shoulder was stuck on my pubic bone, I wouldn't be able to like step out of my body and put my hands in and turn the baby, rotate it and unhook it from my pubic bone so that it could be born, right? I don't know, I can't do that. So I chose to have a midwife for that reason. But in my choosing process, right, I started with one practitioner at the beginning of the pregnancy. I wasn't feeling the vibe because for me, it's all about that. The work is me. Like all these people in the field are qualified to fix the things that could go wrong. So for me, at the end of the day, it's about how I feel with the person, right? And the first person, it didn't really feel the vibe. Second midwife I hired, at the 25th hour, she said, I can't do a home birth. You have to come to my center because it's really busy. It's during the holidays. And I was like, sorry, not going to do that. So then I found someone, at like my 38th week, which is like, people say, oh, that's so late. But I found someone and I just said, look, I respect your license and what you have to do in order to keep your license. So whatever you need me to sign so that I can decline all the things that I'd like to decline, I honor and respect that you are like trying to feed your family. And I'm not going to make it hard for you because it's not about saying no, 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 and F the system. I just have my own things that I want. So she said, sure, that's fine. And she said, I'll just hang out in your house. And when you call me and you need me, I'll be there. And so she was there for 3 days, and just minding her business, reading her books and doing her stuff. And every once in a while would come in and check on me. I liked having that assurance because it allowed me to surrender into my process. And so my biggest mission in my birth experience was to surrender to my body because my body is going to do what it's going to do. I can't control it. All I can do is surrender to it. And every time, right, it's like a deep meditation because every time my mind a thought, would enter into my awareness, I had to allow it to float by, like on a cloud. I had to imagine it on a cloud and let it float by. So I was in a deep meditation and allowing the quote unquote pain to wash over me and trust that that's what my body needed to do in order to get to the next phase of this process, right? So, how could I personally have deeply surrendered when I had this part in my brain that was like, if this were to happen, who could help me? Because I can't do it for myself. So that's why I had her there. Because there was this one thing that I said, for me to totally surrender, which is my job, I need to know that she could be there to help my baby's shoulder if, like, that was my one thing, right? And so everything else was fine. Like she held that space and then the baby was born. So I'd say what a woman, for her to stay sovereign or self-sovereign in this experience, she has to truly understand what she's willing to let go of, what she's willing to quote unquote risk, let's say, what those true risks really are. because I also had to do a lot of deep personal work in my pregnancy after already experiencing a loss in my previous pregnancy. I became deeply acquainted with death and grief. And so for me, I understood in this process that should that happen, I welcome that. And I'm not going to forego my ideals and my convictions and put myself in what I consider as harm's way going to a hospital. I personally consider putting that myself in harm's way if I were to do that. It's not what everybody's harm's way is, but I felt that that was harm's way, and I felt that I was intervening with a process that I had no business intervening in, so that's why I didn't go there. But I became deeply acquainted and intimate and accepting of whatever reality was going to come. And that's not work that I expect every woman to be able to do. It's just part of what my journey has been. So becoming deeply accepting of death made it very possible for me to surrender into my birth. And so I would say to women, if that's what work you're willing to do, it's going to carry you really beautifully through your birth process. That's really the sovereignty. I had no one to blame. All the choices were mine, and I was completely at peace with either outcome, right? After having already experienced death and grief. So when we're in that moment, depending on the setting, we're going to get presented a lot of offers. You're going to get less offers at a home birth, a little more offers at a birth center, and a lot of offers at a hospital. And so one of the reasons I say I would be putting myself and my baby in harm's way going to a hospital is that I, in my deep surrender, would not be able to advocate for myself at a hospital. And if I went into a space of self-advocating, I would not surrender, and I would probably stall my labor. I would cause hormonal interactions to take place that I don't want. I would be, high cortisol, high adrenaline. That would interfere with my labor process. Knowing how I am, so you have to know yourself and how you would engage with these offers. And at a hospital, the moment you get there, you go into triage, you're monitored, you're there for 30 minutes. I had this experience recently with someone in my family. I came out of retirement for attending her birth. And, we went into triage and they listened to her blood pressure and they said, oh, you're going to have to take this drug because your blood pressure is high. And I just looked at them and I said, we just got here. Like, we were in the car, it's snowing, it's 9 degrees outside. We went up the elevator, like, could we just give it a few more blood pressure readings before we make a call so severe? Like, and so then, we put on we were listening to something, gave her a massage. They came back, the blood pressure was significantly lower and not within a, questionable range. And so, she needed to be surrendered to be in her process, and I wouldn't expect her to self-advocate. And so this is where a doula or someone who has experience in birth can be there to offer, to be kind of a sounding board and a space holder, to say, like, let's give this some time and space. And so I would say, this birthing woman was self-sovereign in the sense that she was allowing for time and space to exist. And that's something that a lot of us don't do, is like, oh, they said this, let me do it now, let me jump, let me react. So she was allowing time and space to exist in between taking decisions, receiving, and moving through her process. And after the first hour of a lot of things being offered, right, like, we need to put an IV on you so you can stay hydrated. And we had already talked. She'd already been taking classes, and she said, no, I can just hydrate. I'll drink my water and my electrolytes, It's like, because I always say the IV is a gateway drug. Once your vein is exposed, once you're hooked up, anything at any moment in a reactive moment can be put in there, and it can change the course of the birth. So she declined the IV, and then going into the room, they said, oh, you were GBS positive, which is a test that they do in the pregnancy where they take a swab. They don't do it so much in Europe, and they don't do it in Latin America, which is another point I'll bring up later. But they take a swab and they look for the strep B bacteria. And it's all of us have it in our rectum, like every human does. And sometimes it colonizates, or overpopulates, let's say, in the gut, and then it'll show up in the vaginal canal. And then they say the woman is infected and she's GBS positive and she needs to take antibiotics during her labor. And so, my client, my family member, not client, knew enough to say, I decline this, right? And they're like, okay, this woman's declining everything. We're just going to leave her alone now. And, they'd come in and say, you need to do this, you need to do that. She's like, okay, just give me some time and space. And so every time a woman is presented with an offer, an intervention, she can ask for the time and space. Because but she'll start to realize that more time and space that she requires, they'll stop pushing it. They realize they can't get in, and so they say, okay, this woman is pretty much healthy, and she's not going to accept what we're offering, so we're going to just move our energy and intention to someone else. So I would say, by the time it came for her to start pushing, I don't need to do vaginal exams. That's another thing. I don't do them as a doula. I'm not a medical professional. But I don't need to do any kind of exam to know where the woman is in her labor. At the hospital, they have a woman hooked up to a machine, so they're monitoring her contractions. They do frequent vaginal exams to see how dilated she is, right? How open her cervix is. I don't need to do that. Her behavior, because we're animals, tells me everything. And so I was just listening to her breathing, and I was looking at her face, and I was looking at how slow she was moving and how deliberate her movements became. And I said, okay, we're going to start pushing soon. And then her breathing kind of had a sudden shift, and she began grunting. And I said, okay, this baby's coming. And she said, should we, call the... I said, I don't call anybody, just push the baby. We're here, something happens, we're here, right? But why do we need to turn on the theater lights and get all the people running in, get them ready with all their newborn procedures? They're just waiting, kind of like, it feels like vultures, and, no disrespect, but that's how it feels. Just energetically, it feels like you're surrounded by vultures. And so the baby started crowning, and just at that moment, the nurse came in and was like, oh, you're pushing the baby? So used to women screaming for the attendant to come. And she said, oh, I guess I'll get the doctor. And so the doctor came in, and they didn't have much to do. They really didn't have anything to do. But then when the baby's out, they're ready. They're ready with the hepatitis B vaccine. They're ready to give the baby a bath. They're ready to cut the cord immediately. And I normally wouldn't speak up, but the woman is in her process, and this is where it helps to have an advocate or a doula or even a husband who is advocating. And I said, we're going to keep the cord attached. And she said, we don't do lotus births at this hospital. I said, I'm not asking for a lotus birth. We don't have to keep the cord attached for 5 days. I'm simply just saying she'd like to keep the cord attached for the next hour while she bonds with the baby. She's like, I, kind of short circuit, right? Because there's a software and there's a program, and I hit a key that, I don't know, doesn't run with that software. And so she did. She left it attached, and then kind of threw her hands up and said, well, there's nothing for me to do here, and just left. She was, her ego was wounded. Her pride was wounded in a sense. And after that, it was like at least 8 different procedures they wanted to do on the baby. And they kept saying, oh, we'll give you the baby right back, or we'll just, give us the baby for a moment. We'll go do the things we need to do. And then she just kept saying, no, later, right? More time and space. No, later. No, later. I'll do it later. Oh yeah, I'll do the shot later. Oh, I'll do the vitamin K later, So that time and space really becomes the woman's tool to create that self-sovereignty, no matter what's thrown at her, right? And they might say, okay, it's later now. And then maybe she's a little bit more back in her body, and she can say, oh, we'll do this at the pediatrician when we go home, and then you just get the hospital off your back, right? So it's hard to say people always ask me, what should we do? If we're going to pick a newborn procedure, what are the ones we should do? And I just say, you have to get really intimate with all of the side effects of each one, because they all have them, because none of them are things that were ever done before. They've all been designed for this modern birthing culture. And what are you okay with? I believe in letting the cord pulse until all the blood goes back to the baby. There's a lot of evidence there, anecdotal, clinical, showing that when you leave the cord attached, the baby has higher iron levels, more regulated blood sugar. They are less agitated. Just energetically speaking, mood wise, they're less
Mhm.
agitated when the cord's been left attached. So there's a lot pointing in the direction of leaving it attached. However, in the knock 'em out, drag 'em out era of birth that started in 1900, let's say, up until recently, where the woman was knocked out, the baby's dragged out. That's why they call it that. They would clamp the cord and cut it immediately. Because babies were exposed to so many drugs, they couldn't initiate their own breathing by taking that first gasp of air to start the lungs going, to get the machine going, right? So they had to cut the cord to force it to breathe and wake it up. And that's just a practice that has stuck with us. So even women who didn't get any drugs, they're still clamping the cord because it's just a habit. It's an unconscious habit. So there's a lot that women have to contend with when going into what some might call the wolf's den, the hospital, if they want to have choices. And if they choose to go there anyway for whatever reason, it's just about creating time and space and having an advocate with you, because your only job is to surrender for the
Mhm.
process to be able to unfold.
Yeah, thank you. I was so engaged with that, and thank you for sharing that story because it sort of puts a lot into perspective of slowing things down, of yeah, slowing things down and just painting a picture of what a process could look like. I mean, that was her individual process, but
Right.
it's almost like what it looks like to be responsible in this space, whilst also navigating that kind of energy, right? That kind of system. And that was mind blowing. That was amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Um,
Yeah.
one thing that I wanted to touch on as well is, do you believe or do you know that the when the baby is 1 month or on basically the day of conception or whatnot, is is there a conscious connection already between the mother and the fetus? Is there a system in which the fetus is picking up information about the mother's patterns already consciously? And
Yeah.
is this important?
Well, I having the consciousness of this possibility, right? And I use that word simply because there's so many people who want proof, and then there are so many people who have um, their idea of what proof looks like. So I'm going to say yes. I believe this to be true. I've seen it to be true. I'll actually share some. I'll send them over to you so you can put them in the show notes if you'd like some beautiful studies and stories on this, where women, even before conception, have already begun communicating with their
Mhm.
baby, right? They've already started calling it into being or seeing their baby in dreams, hearing the baby come into their consciousness at any moment. And when the conception happens, if it's a conscious conception, or, maybe it wasn't intended, but it happened at that moment, the mother and the baby are already forming a connection if she's not aware of it previously, not only through, you know, the forming of the cells and the information that forms the cells, but also the way in which she believes and sees the world, right? So she's already weaving stories for the baby. They're already doing a storytelling between the two of them, and the baby's the one receiving and being formed. I saw this personally when I did a family constellation, um, where we observed my birth experience. And I don't know if you're familiar with it personally, but just to give people some background, it's the work that was pioneered by Bert Hellinger, but a lot of people have been bringing it into our consciousness for some time, since the 1950s, I believe. And you basically bring people, humans or figurines, into a field and you can observe a situation because our unconscious will move those figures. Like you said, we're in a connected consciousness. And so I wanted to analyze my mother's pregnancy. I wanted to observe it, let's say. And so we placed someone to represent her in front of us and we just observed her. And because my unconscious already lived that, right? When I was in the womb, my unconscious already lived that. She was able to connect to my unconscious and she was able to show me what was happening through her body. And so I saw, my mother's experience and I saw the role that I played in that experience, right? I saw that she was in a state of deep indecision due to a family situation that was going on. And I saw the woman representing me going through the birth canal, what she was experiencing. And she was saying, I don't know if I want to, I'm not sure, which was me, right, as a baby. I'm not sure if it's safe for me to come here yet. I'm still waiting for my mother to be okay with me coming here. So I'm not sure, right? And then it was beautiful information for me because it showed me about the life script that I wrote as a child for myself. The uncertainty of taking the next step, the uncertainty that it'll be safe if I take that next step. And so factor that into medications and drugs and things at a birth that also impact a child biologically. I was able to see how her belief system, her story, what she was doing, and the dynamics impacting our family were influencing me and how I started to hold the responsibility. I started to hold her responsibility for her in the womb. And when I observed myself in that constellation, that person kept saying, it's going to be okay. So even from the womb, I was already parenting and nurturing my own mother, which is not my role as a child. So in my 30s at that point, I was able to see very clearly how our dynamic took shape. And it wasn't, me as a toddler, it had already been written in the womb. And so all the work that I, had done in my talk therapy, as a young adult and trying to understand why and this, it became, that's what I love about family constellations. It's like so precise. It's like taking a scalpel and just kind of excising the thing and looking at it and saying, oh, I see you. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Please, forgive me. Like, you do that whole thing in one moment and it's done. And so I saw very clearly in my own experience how that connection in the womb starts to form the life script for that child that will be born. And then, of course, we get into the subject of surrogacy, for example, where we say the woman who holds the baby is not the biological mother. Her experience, her biology has no impact on that fetus. It just belongs to the woman whose egg was implanted into that human, right? So this is deeply, interesting to me, let's say, and I've been looking into it a lot over the last year. And in my research, I found that amniotic fluid, right, that the mother produces for the baby, and the baby also adds to through its urine and through its cell shedding, starts to form the baby's cerebral spinal fluid. And at a certain point in the pregnancy, the valves close and that fluid is sealed in there and it's done, right? So how can we say, I know that it's sales pages of surrogacy websites, but how can they really say that the mother who's gestating, who's holding the baby, is not impacting on a cellular level, energetic level, spiritual level, the development of the baby? So, yeah, I would say absolutely. Everything the mother does, thinks, feels is forming the baby's experience, the consciousness, and the relationship that they will have moving forward. It's already forming in the womb, which is another huge problem with surrogacy. So, sometimes when I work with women and they want to do some alchemy, birth trauma alchemy from their first birth, and now they're pregnant for a second time, they say, I don't want to cry. I don't want to have a big emotional release. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because I don't want to hurt the baby. But what I tell them is you're not hurting the baby. What you're doing is now alleviating the baby from a lot of burden. This discharging and this offloading is actually, this alchemy is actually going to heal and perhaps prevent something much deeper from forming,
Mhm.
that you might not want. So this is actually the perfect time. And the baby's in the alchemy with you.
Mhm.
They're part of the process.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing and fascinating to me, and also the relationship between the woman and her partner, or the dynamic of that relationship is also this information is also being picked up by the fetus already as well, and so it's
Right.
like they're understanding this family dynamic, which is eventually imbued into themselves, and they end up seeing a lot of patterns themselves when they grow up that are related to this.
Yeah.
Um, I did have a question. It's just coming back to me now. So yeah, and the irony of all of this is, I mean, I personally believe that we choose this. We choose this experience. There is some divine knowingness of the kinds of experiences that we are looking out for in this life for our own evolution, our own spiritual growth, that we almost seek these positions, these experiences. And so,
Yeah.
though yes, we are subject to that kind of influence from our mothers and her patterns and her dynamics, but it's we've chosen that, and
Yeah.
I see that throughout my entire life. Some of my greatest life's challenges and things that I'm always being presented with in my reality to work on can be traced back to a lot of my birthing experiences. I've through the works of something called body electronics by a man
Mm.
named Dr. John Ray. I don't believe he was a
Okay.
doctor. His name was John Ray, John Whitman Ray. It's called body electronics, and he has a really amazing modality, which is essentially it's it's alchemy and transmutation, and it's based on acupuncture, but it's
Mhm.
sustained acupuncture where we hold specific points on the body, and we can hold them for an hour to 2 hours, 3 hours, and it's a process in which it brings up things that have lain dormant within ourselves, patterns,
Yeah.
word patterns, emotions, memories, things that have been suppressed. And I was doing this modality with my mentor, and I went through a birth trauma. I relived it,
Mm.
which was I was born almost with my butt first, essentially my
Mhm.
leg, and I know it was a very traumatic experience for myself and my mother.
Mm.
What I found during that process of reliving this experience, which was a very, very terrifying, one of the most terrifying and painful processes that I've ever been through, is that I gained so much wisdom about how that process has influenced who I am today. And I see the same tendencies of me coming through that canal, coming through that womb in that process, and how I go about my life, how I interact with people, my wife, my community people, and how I treat myself. And it's an amazing experience to see that almost come full circle. And that was
Mhm.
my moment where it was like I knew I chose this because there's a part of me that also believes that it's not a part of me. I know I chose these experiences to have the things that I'm having to uncover through my unconscious and work through and transmute these elements within myself. I've chosen to do that, whether it's part of
Mhm.
my karma or part of my own just initiation experience into more greater divine estates essentially. But yeah, and it's just like it brought me back to what you mentioned as the first thing is it brought you back to the birthing process, and I think it's just such a it is the most spiritual process there is. Um, so I'm wondering if you could just touch on your thoughts about this process as a spiritual process.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I know some people have said to me in session, like, why would I have chosen so much pain? Why would my baby have wanted to go through this? And there is a deeper, it's hard, it's hard to accept that as humans, like the human ego, it's hard for the human ego to accept that the soul would want to experience pain and suffering, because what the human ego wants is to feel good all the time. And so, it's hard to accept that the soul would put us through very trying tests for what I call the polishing of the diamond, the polishing of the heart. Because for me, all of these experiences really do polish the heart, and that's for me the purpose of life. And I know now we get down into what the meaning of life is, right? And what the purpose of life is. But if we keep it in birth, and birth as a vehicle for diving into this process, we can use it to get closer and closer to the truth. And I say to women, we have to trust the intelligence of the baby's soul, because although it is a baby, right, and it doesn't walk and talk and have the same executive functioning that we do, there is no indication that there's any less intelligence. Actually, I would say that there is more intelligence because it hasn't been stifled and suppressed by the 3D human body and experience. So we have to trust that they would choose that. So although we have goals for more self-sovereign and empowered experiences in birth, those are working goals and things we aspire to, and more consciousness. But we have to take those experiences that came to us when we were less conscious and alchemize them. There's no accident, and we have to trust that we can do something with that to give us more information, and that comes with children who, due to certain medical procedures, were born not breathing, were not born alive, developed certain things like cerebral palsy, or disabilities that become a lifelong quest for the parents, for the family unit, for the evolution of their souls. And so the varying degrees of the suffering and the challenge and the tests, they're all perceived by the human ego, right? But the soul is having this experience for a purpose, and we can choose how much suffering we want to engage in, or we want to view it with, or we want to experience in the process. So yeah, there's no mistake there. And I also, on that same note, feel that the medical system, by design, if we're talking about different designers in this hierarchy, was placed there as a tool for the soul's evolution. It was one of the things that was placed for that expansion and the ascension of the soul. So yes, while it's dark, it also serves a deeper purpose. I think there's different things being siphoned through that medical system.
Because that's really interesting, because I was just reading a book about Tai Chi, and the principle of explaining the yin and yang logo is where the yang is the most polarized is at the dawn of the yin. So it makes sense that something so horrendous, you listen to the stories, we've all had experiences. I've certainly had experiences, my father's had experiences of the medical system and the true nature of it, the brutality of it. But it isn't, when you're really looking at it, and it's not that you have an open mind, but you're able to introspect at a certain level, it's almost divine. There's a divine unfolding. And it's certainly been that nature for myself and my relationship with that system. So yeah, it's also fascinating. Have you ever had experiences of mothers kind of being in contact with the baby's soul before conception? These I've heard of stories.
Yeah, I've had many clients and women in my life who've had that experience. One specifically, I remember last year, I was her doula, and she lost her pregnancy kind of early on, like around 3 months, and went through some deep grief around that because she chose to allow the miscarriage to take place on its own, which is in itself a huge huge taking of radical responsibility. She did not want to go to the medical system to extract or assist with the process. And it took a few months for the baby to finally birth itself after she miscarried. And she
Wow.
just kept trusting the process, and we would talk. And so I guess I was still the doula in that sense, just a sounding board as she was alchemizing within herself. Because through that process, we found some really interesting, beautiful gems that were just waiting to be uncovered around her own nuclear family, where she came from, around her relationship with her husband. And she said, I'm going to take this opportunity while I'm in this grief to heal those things, because this is what the baby is showing me. And this is what I'm hearing the baby tell me. I have to resolve this with my husband. I have to resolve this with my dad. And so as she went through an extended portal, I would say, and she was receiving what she felt like were messages from the baby. And then once the baby birthed itself, she started having dreams and saying, the baby's telling me it's coming back when the time is right. And I'm going to trust that he'll come back. He will come back when the time is right. And I'd say probably 5 months later, she was pregnant again. And it was the same for her. It was the same soul,
Wow.
and deeply connected to the pregnancy, in communication and contact. And I know some people say, well, how can I know that? Like, how can I hear it? And it doesn't sound like, when you pick up the phone, you say hello, and then in the receiver, you hear someone's voice talking to you. It's often not like that. It's very much so a glimmer of a visual, or a glimmer of, something that drops into your consciousness. That's the messaging. You don't necessarily hear a voice, right? And I say
Mhm.
that because some people say, I want to connect, I'm not hearing that thing. And so I say to them, just quiet your mind and ask the question. Ask if it's okay to ask the question. Are they available to answer the question? And ask if they're there. And if they are, the first thing that comes to your mind is the answer. It's not like, you're not going to see it show up on your computer screen and suddenly there's something typing, right? It's not like that. And so every woman that's shared this experience with me has said it either comes through a dream, it comes through them when they're praying, or when they're meditating, or just on a walk. They might ask a question and then they hear a response. And so that's how they start to form that communication and that connection with their baby. And even asking questions like, what are we doing together in this life? What, things like that. And then they'll start journaling, they'll write down
Mhm.
answers, and then they'll look back later and say, this all either came to pass, or this all is resonating, or, whatever the case may be.
Mhm. I do a lot of dream interpretation because I
Mm.
found so symbolic in terms of being able to work with what's given to me. And my sister, who is pregnant, and she's having lots of dreams during her pregnancy. And I'm wondering if you ever work with clients and their dreams. Is that something that you touch on?
I don't. I wish I had that gift.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's definitely it's more of the unconscious stuff, probably,
Yeah.
from the. But what you're saying about with the intuition with the baby and asking the baby those questions, it's a bit more spiritual, maybe outside of the realm of dreams. I'm not too sure, but yeah, I just thought I would ask you that question. I have
Yeah.
one last question, sort of yeah, wrap that up. But what would you say to somebody who wants to have that natural birth and wants to be strong about it and wants it a certain way, but their own patterns in their life, they're too almost scared and rigid to take it on board and to go at it with full conviction. What would you say to somebody who is in this position?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite words is titration. So, how can you titrate into something more closely? How can you try titrate in more to what you want? So, I do this with receiving, right? The women in my membership, the doula trainees, they might say, I really want to start supporting women, and I feel that I can't even charge for, what I'm offering, because I don't, that number doesn't, my body can't hold that number. And I say, okay, so why don't you start out with a number that your body can hold, right? Maybe you charge $200 for your support, let's say. How does that feel? Oh, it still feels like my body is having a resistance. Okay, how about 175? Okay, that feels better. Okay, I can, yeah. And the body really starts to respond to that, gets behind it, starts to feel it on a cellular level. And then they stay there for a while until they can reassess and say, okay, now I can go up to 200, right? That's just a simple example of receiving abundance, titrating into more abundance. When we're talking about something like birth, if a woman cannot, like when she imagines not going to the hospital and all these alarm bells start going off for her body, she starts sweating or she feels stiff. Okay, so maybe it's not about going and birthing at home, right? If you imagine leaving the hospital and your body reacts this way, what can you titrate into? What would it feel like to have the support of a doula there? Is that something that your body can hold to receive that support? Okay, what would it feel like to, maybe your whole life you thought you'd get an epidural and you'd go to the hospital and you didn't want to feel any pain? What would it feel like to have a doula there and opt out of the epidural, but still be at the hospital? Okay, I'm shaky, but the body's feeling a little shaky, but something in it feels good, and I want to get closer to that. Okay, so just focus on that experience, allowing your body to titrate into receiving an unmedicated birth with support in this setting. Because sometimes the work of dismantling all of our belief systems around the medical system is overwhelming and it's too much. And I know that women want to enjoy the pregnancy. And so, can you get behind that? And most women can, and focus on that. For me, I teach pleasure practices in my membership and my doula training. How do we integrate more pleasure, right? Walking outside, sitting under the sun, gazing into the sun, different things. Like, how do we integrate that more? 8 years ago, I couldn't even take a nap in the middle of the day when I was exhausted because my nervous system couldn't handle doing something for myself during hours in which I was supposed to be incredibly productive. I had to titrate into taking a nap in the middle of the day. First, I would just stop working at the computer for 15 minutes. That was my first step titrating in. And I just allowed myself to not work, and I would close my eyes and I'd sit at the desk for 15 minutes and I'd say, okay. A week later, I was able to leave the desk and go sit outside. A month later, I was able to finally take a nap. I couldn't force myself to go lay in a bed and take a nap. My system wouldn't have handled it properly. So I would say a woman can start practicing titration in small, low stakes ways, allowing the body to ease into something new in steps. And this can prepare her for making a different choice for her birth.
Yeah, that's amazing. That word titration alone, and just how you've mentioned that and explained that, is so helpful, and I'm sure so many people are going to be, helped by that. This has been such a wonderful conversation. We can talk about this stuff for hours. We can go in so many different directions, and you're incredibly knowledgeable in this and have so much experience and wisdom to share. So yeah, I appreciate you just sharing what you've shared today and just coming on here. Um, and I'm sure so many people are going to want to find out more about you and what you do. So where can people find you on socials, website, etc.?
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here with you. I really, really have enjoyed our conversation. So thank you for having me. I'm on Instagram. So my handle, Eyla Cuenca Birth, and then our website, Uncovering Birth. And I'm there. I have a podcast that I just started called Born to Know. So it's a combination of peeling back the layers of, different belief systems and certain frameworks that we've formed, and also expounding on different elements of birth. So, those are the places where I hang out and I can be reached. And I'm always available to speak with anyone. whatever. If it's like you feel called, I've worked with men too who say, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here, but I feel like I'm supposed to have this conversation. And we end up going into a really beautiful place, uncovering some blocks and limiting beliefs around fatherhood, around conception, around their own experience. And so this is for everyone. We were all born, so it's applicable universally.
Wow. Yeah, everybody go check her Instagram, her handles, and her website and to find out more. And last question, Ayla, what have you got planned in the near future? Have you got anything releasing, projects, anything like that that you would like people to know about?
Yeah, well, we're starting the doula training this week. So that's happening. And then we have a childbirth educator training and certification for those of you who want to teach about childbirth in the way that I've been discussing it today. And then I will be in Texas in May for the Confluence event. I'll open the event for Alex Zek, and I'll be talking about birth. And it's going to be 4 days of incredible speakers, events, workshops. So, yeah, that's what I've got going on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you again for coming on. It was an amazing conversation. I'm sure so many are going to tune in and enjoy it. And yeah, thank you for that.
Bye.
Bye.